proteins. Now you have to take a look at the digestion, the absorption, and really what are they doing? What's the functions in your body? Plus, how much do you need? That's this video. All right, so looking at digestion and absorption of proteins first. The goal is to break those proteins down into amino acids. So how do you do that? You start by chewing your food. The mouth has mechanical digestion occurring. As you chew your food, you're taking those larger proteins and physically grinding them into smaller pieces. Then you swallow. Esophagus doesn't do much. Stomach, you have hydrochloric acid and pepsin. Think gastric juices. Pepsin is going to be a chemical breakdown because of an enzyme. It works because of the low acidity, more hydrochloric acid, and you mix it all together. That's going to make chyme. Now, protein's going to stay in your stomach longer than carbohydrates would. You stay fuller longer, just like you would with lipids. But eventually you start to release it, a little bit of a time, into your small intestines. Once in your small intestines, this is where the majority of digestion will occur. Just like for your lipids, just like for your carbohydrates, your small intestines really is where the absorption and digestion is occurring. What will happen is you'll have your pancreatic juices, again, being secreted. We know they contain enzymes for carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins in this case. What we're looking at, there's many different protein enzymes. We're going to focus on two. The main two are going to be trypsin and chymotrypsin. The others, they help out, but those are the main two big ones. But in conjunction with trypsin and chymotrypsin, helping to chemically break down your proteins, the lining of the small intestines will also release enzymes of their own. So you have all these enzymes coming together to help break down the protein into its amino acid building blocks in the small intestines. Once it's down to the building blocks, those base amino acids, then you can absorb it into the lining of the small intestines. That absorption, though, requires energy, requires ATP. So a good thing to have all that glucose we've been balancing to keep the ATP levels high enough. All right, let's continue that process. Sometimes you end up breaking down those amino acids even further beyond the amino acid point. Now, if you end up breaking them down further beyond amino acids, you end up releasing nitrogen-containing ammonia. Well, the ammonia isn't really great for your system. So what happens is the liver will take that ammonia and convert it to urea. Urea then, as it circulates through your blood, will be cleaned out by the kidneys. Thankfully, you don't do this a lot. Usually 10% or less of your amino acids are going to be broken down beyond the amino acid point. So all that protein you're eating, 10% or less, gets broken down beyond the amino acids for the actual components inside the amino acid. And of that 10% that's broken down, the liver and kidneys help clean things up and get them out of your blood. But the amino acids, 90% of them aren't being broken down, or even more. So those amino acids, your body is going to try to recycle as much as possible to keep reusing the amino acids over and over if possible. Well, that's a good thing because on a daily basis, you're going to break down about 250 grams of protein every day. And then you'll build up 250 grams of protein into other structures, enzymes, and other components. Just to give a comparison of how much 250 grams is, a typical egg is going to have 6 grams of protein. 6 grams. That means to get to that 250 gram mark is give or take about 42 eggs. That's a lot of protein. So your body's constantly trying to break down and build up, break down and build up. Because what you're building, you're making components of your DNA, components of your RNA. You're using it to build your structures of your cells, build your enzymes. There's a lot of things that proteins are being used for to build in your bodies. And all this building is being pulled from the pool of amino acids that is your blood. Your blood constantly has all these free amino acids floating through and circulating. Your cells will uptake what they need and build those structures. So you have this whole pool of amino acids. You have all this building occurring. I think it's time to go through some functionality. Protein functions are tons and tons of them. You're looking at enzymes and hormones, antibodies and antigens, structural components. The list goes on and on and on. So let's look at one particular one that's interesting, collagen. Now the protein collagen is your main structural unit. It's about 30% of your bones. And if you're saying, hold on, bones are calcium. True, bones are calcium. But you need the calcium with the collagen so the bones don't just snap like being very brittle crystals. Tendons, ligaments, skin, muscle, they all use collagen. So it's kind of important to make sure you've got plenty of this collagen built in your body. As we mentioned last video, collagen is going to be about 1,000 amino acids to build it. So it takes quite a bit. Enzymes. We know from past videos that enzymes are going to help catalyze a reaction. But enzymes are specific. Each enzyme will only catalyze a particular reaction. It can help to lower the activation energy. It can help to combine different molecules. But the key thing is those enzymes are reusable. So you're constantly going over and over that reaction. The same enzyme keeps getting used over and over. So it helps to reuse it and doesn't get consumed, which is a good thing. Hormones, chemical messengers, your endocrine system. The key thing here is these hormones a lot of times are turning enzymes on and off. And the hormones, they're being transported in the blood, which blood brings us into fluid balance, acid-base balance. You're going to have proteins in your blood, like those enzymes or hormones, but you'll have these high amount of proteins in the blood. You maintain a high amount of concentration. The reason you maintain a high concentration, things like albumin has a high concentration, for example, is because you're trying to make sure you're maintaining homeostasis of water. In your blood, by maintaining a high concentration of proteins, they're going to mimic the concentration in your cells. So if both the cell concentration and the blood concentration of proteins are pretty close, the water won't try to dilute either one of them to reach a balance. It kind of just stays in a proper balance. But to go back to that aspect of an acid-base balance as well, albumin is slightly acidic and also is going to be a negative anion. The reason that's important, your blood is trying to maintain a pH of 7.35 to 7.45. So slightly basic. By having this slightly acidic albumin helps to balance off other molecules in the blood that are a little more basic. And by being a negative anion, the negative component of albumin is going to balance out the positive ions in the blood. Things like we've already talked about, potassium and sodium. But albumin has another function. Albumin also helps with the transportation in your blood. It'll help with hormone transportation, some vitamin transportation, and fatty acid transportation. Another one of the proteins in your blood is going to be hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is going to help with transport of oxygen. Then there's also myoglobin in the muscles, transport of oxygen. Again, proteins helping with fluid and acid-base balancing. All right, shifting into protection. You're saying, well, how do proteins, how does that work? Proteins are antigens and antibodies. Antibodies can recognize foreign antigens. That means they can recognize pathogens that have entered into your body. So by recognizing them, they can mark them for destruction. That also comes into play when you look at wound healing, tissue regeneration. If you get a cut, for example, or a scrape, and you're bleeding, well, that process, almost every step of the process to heal, is going to need proteins. When you start off, first off, the initial injury, your blood vessels dilate to get more components there to help seal it off. That's bradykinins. You then have fibrin, which is going to help secure the platelets to stop the bleeding. And then you have collagen we've talked about. Collagen is mending and creating the structure. But that collagen is also used as your muscles are constantly rebuilding. Your bones are constantly rebuilding. So this helps to cause those different tissues to rebuild. But as you're doing all this requires energy. The rebuilding needs energy. We know that energy comes from glucose primarily. It can come from lipids too, but it can also come from proteins if necessary. Now, in the case of energy production for the proteins, the liver can break down your amino acids and strip it right down to the carbon skeleton. That carbon skeleton can be sent into the citric acid cycle for energy production. Now, a lot of times this isn't the most efficient, and you don't really want to do too much of this because your proteins are your structural units in your body. And do this too much, you're breaking down your structural units. You don't really want to do that. So it's important to make sure that energy production is primarily in glucose and not in proteins. So how much of this protein do you need? Because we're talking about energy production, wound healing, tissue regeneration, protection of your body, fluid balance, acid-base balance, hormones, enzyme. I mean, there's a lot of things that proteins will do. So a rough estimate of the amount of protein is take your body weight in kilograms and then multiply that by 0.8. That's just a general ballpark. It's not the answer to everything. Because if you're overweight by chance, that won't really match up very well. For children, it's also a little bit off because they need more protein because they're growing. Certain athletes, depending on what they do, will need more protein. So that really is just a very general, hey, here's a ballpark. You gotta then customize it for your own body. Do you need more? Do you need less? What do you need for your body to function properly? And while you're balancing that, make sure you're balancing essential aspects. Because in the case of proteins, remember there are 9 essential amino acids. You gotta make sure you balance and get those 9 essential amino acids in. To find those, they're in complete protein foods. And complete protein foods are going to be more animal-based products. Things like milk, cheese, eggs, fish, poultry. Those will be complete protein sources. Incomplete protein sources are more plant-based. Legumes, corn, nuts. They still have protein, but you can't get all 9 essential amino acids. All is not essential in one source. You have to combine them to make sure you mix and match. Which is why if anyone's on a plant-based diet, so vegetarians, vegan, they can still get all of those 9 essential amino acids, but they have to be careful that they're balancing those incomplete protein sources to make sure they get all 9 of the essential amino acids in their diet. And the plant-based proteins aren't necessarily as easy to digest and absorb as the animal ones. You can still do it no problem, but just gotta watch out for how much you're ingesting and balancing the different sources to make sure that you're getting all 9 of those essential amino acids. So proteins, how do you break them down? What do you use them for? And all their functionality? That's a ton of things going on there. Make sure you balance your protein out, getting all those essentials and as well as those non-essentials, so you have a full, complete balance of proteins. Until the next video.